Defining Duke, an Xbox podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support the show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Salutations, everybody. It is Maddie here today, and welcome to episode 89 of Defining Duke Ultimate, a Defining Duke supplement. I'm in a black site right now, it would appear. This setup is very different from what we typically do. My webcam was giving me a lot of trouble. I swear I'm okay. I'm safe. I appreciate any in advance concern, but today I am joined by our Lord and Savior of LSM, Colin Moriarty. Colin, how are you, my friend?
Thank you. I'm here. It's good to be here. Thank you. I'm glad you're doing well in Chechnya or wherever you are right now. And everything's good, man. Everything's flowing. I'm glad to be here with you. And it's good to be in the guest chair, so I don't have to put in so much work into this episode like I usually do. I'm tired of it.
Yes, I feel you on that. I got you. But today we're getting into the state of the games media, which has definitely been a recurring theme throughout Defining Duke Ultimate. We've spoken to journalists who are attending college and their thoughts on the state of games media. I've had freelancers join us here on the show to talk about pay structure for games media within that style of work. And now with a lot of layoffs and some acquisitions in tow, it feels like the perfect storm has set up for us to talk about the state of the games media once more. I wanted to begin with what I thought was sort of the Kickstarter to all of this, which is G4 TV. The writing was really on the wall with this one. You and I both definitely agree that it didn't seem like this was primed for a successful return. And now we've learned that through Kotaku, 20 to 30 people have been laid off in a 200 plus person. That's a tongue twister if I've heard one. 200 plus person staff. And Colin, I want to get your general thoughts on what's going on with G4 and why they staffed up this much. And of course, the nature of the layoffs we're seeing across our industry.
Yeah, the seminal message I want to get out to the audience is that you really do know better than a lot of people in positions of power. There's evidence of this constantly. I'm not one of these guys that sits around and says CEOs don't deserve to make lots of money. I think they do. I think it's excessive to make $50 million a year. I think a CEO can say, yeah, I'm worth $10 million a year, $5 million a year. It's like, okay, I think you can justify that. It is a lifestyle choice. It is when you're an executive in a C-suite, when you're doing things, it is difficult. You climb. It is dog eat dog. There's no more dog eat dog enterprise than anything to do with money. But all that said, there are people in these places that don't know what the fuck they are talking about. And they have no idea what they're doing. And imagine a situation where someone actually told someone else, I want to revive G4. And then it got through all of the different power brokers and all of the different key holders. And someone was like, yeah. And on and on and on. It's just that to me, it really was. I have these jarring moments every once in a while, just these philosophical moments where I'm like, where I recognize something that's just this truism. And this is one of those things. Mm-hmm. I can't believe that someone greenlit this. I can't believe that anyone believed that this was going to work. I'm not trying to be mean. I just think G4 went away, I think about 10 years ago, the first one. And I think that it stayed probably about 10 years past its relevance by the time it went away at that point. I think it was a flash in the pan, turn of the century, turn of the millennium, TV, yeah, let's do it, but people were kind of already doing the internet thing. Magazines were still pretty big. You had kind of nascent things happening like the 1UP show. And of course, podcasts existed at IGN and other places long before G4 went away. So I just look at that and that's what I walk away with is I just cannot believe I can understand someone saying we have this guerrilla operation idea. Comcast, we own this G4 name. Give me 20 people and let's see if we can do something with it. Back us with a little bit of capital. Dude, I was talking on our show, 200 people at bare minimum is like $20 million a year in headcount. I mean, if you look at it pretty conservatively, that's $100,000 per person. That's not. And remember, when you employ someone, you're paying 4.5% of their FICA taxes. You're obviously putting up a building that they might go to, their production, all the costs. So it's not just salary. That's why that number is probably soft. So can you imagine someone went to someone and said, give us 20, 25, $30 million for a year of running G4. It's maddening. And that's to me just insanity. It was never going to work. I can't believe only 20 or 30 people went away. I imagine that crew is going to whittle down to almost nothing before very long. And that's just the sad truth. There's just I don't celebrate people losing their jobs. I really don't, even if I don't like them. It doesn't make sense what these companies are doing and the way that they're trying to approach an audience. It doesn't make sense. So to me, G4's death was obvious. It was like Stadia going down recently. Like, of course. You're just waiting.
Exactly. And especially with G4, there's a lot of controversy surrounding it where I think people have written it off as a bit of an anomaly. I think it's a part of a bigger issue, which is, the games media is fading now. We're going to talk about multiple examples here, but to me with G4, it felt like they started off as one thing, which was like Hollywood gamer, if you will, like we're going to be the TV production for video games. And that was cool for the moment it was alive. I didn't watch it much, to tell you the truth, but that doesn't mean it was unimportant to others. But then they went away, and it's one of those things that certain things it's like with even video game IP, like certain things just need to stay dead at the end of the day. Like certain things don't need to be revived. I can get behind the idea of like, throw 20 people at this, see what you can do. But I feel like what happened here with G4 is a part of the, if you will, social issue that occurs in our industry, which is, I feel like a lot of people are afraid to say no to certain folks in our side of this work. I feel this is a situation where it was an obvious no from the start, but there's a lot of ego, there's a lot of sway, and no one's bubble can be burst on California. So it just feels like this was a situation that was doomed from the start. It was obvious. A lot of people read the writing on the wall, but they pushed forward anyway. And, some people got a nice bag probably for it and moved on. But this brand's forever dead after all this is said and done, which is the sad part because they could have handled it a little better. And I'm much like you, not trying to dance on anyone's grave, so to say. I'm not celebrating someone being laid off, but we continue to see these outlets and journalists fool themselves into thinking that this is the way because it matters to them. They're not matching what matters to the audience, which is finding an individual personality, or in our case, a group of personalities, or within those groups, certain personalities that you vibe with, you like how they break things down, their personal tastes. Those days are gone for games media. I'd say, Colin, you were part of the last class that really offered that, with certain ones still lingering around, like Ryan McCaffrey. But when it was like you, Greg, so on and so forth, like you guys were a part of a class where we felt like, as someone who watched your guys' work, I felt like I could attach myself to you guys. There was something more personal about that work. But since there's been such a revolt in games journalism due to just the work not being great, the trust being whittled away, I feel like them returning with this idea shows they've been truly out of touch with what fans want, what they're looking for, and it's individual personalities. Most people have already moved on. So again, G4 didn't come across as much of a surprise, but there was a lot of controversy surrounding it, particularly with one of the hosts, Indiana Black, aka Frosk. The most recent happening was her saying she survived after everyone had been let go, but then it turns out she was let go. Adam Sessler was, I put this in quotes, stepping back. He's been in recent content, but he's not as involved. Kevin Pereira, he was always going to say, he's always said it was a part of his plans to leave, but he started to leave the show now. And it's all happening at once, where I feel it's just a telltale sign that everyone knows this ship is going down.
Yeah, it's brutal, dude. You bring up an interesting point about, well, you're wearing, for people that are listening and they don't see it, you're wearing your Mets sweatshirt right now, right? They're in the middle of a pennant chase, and playoffs.
The chase is over.
I guess that's over now. Yeah, but
yeah, they got swept. It's over.
Yeah, but it was exciting, right? And there's none of the players that are on the Mets now were on the team during the Subway Series, for instance, in 2000. But what connects, the great Mets today, or the Mets players people love, to the Darryl Strawberries and the Tom Seavers and, I don't know, the Carlos Beltrans and whoever? Like, what focuses your attention? And it's like, well, in sports, it's like tradition and maybe a winning history or a team you glom onto and the heroes, and there's a family feeling and there's a brand. And without that, a team is just this vapid thing. That's why I think one of the interesting things about teams coming and going early in various sports leagues like the NHL, when they had a team in Cleveland and all, and the Atlanta Flames and all this random stuff, it's because those markets just couldn't withstand it. It wasn't a natural place for that. And so they went to the place like Calgary in that example where they can support that team. And I say this because the outlets had that at one point. The magazines had that at one point. And I would say like there was a continuity with Nintendo Power for probably 20 years, I would say. PlayStation Magazine for 10 years or so. IGN, I think Per Schneider and those guys are still there, but really from the mid 90s, N64.com and all that, all the way to maybe 10 years ago. And without that tradition, without that anchoring something, whatever it might be, all you have are brands that are empty shells. And I said on a recent show that it feels a lot like what's happening at CNN, and I'm not being political in any way. I'm saying CNN was bought, for people that don't know, by Discovery recently. And they basically are just going through and firing a bunch of people, realizing that if you can't make it work at CNN, you are the problem, because there's a huge masthead here. People are drawn to us. You can just put a cardboard cutout on and get 500,000 people watching you. It's so what are you doing with that? And so it's like, bye, Brian Stelter, bye, all these guys. Like, you have no audience. We don't want you. You're not part of the tradition. We're trying to build something here that's memorable. And I feel that way sometimes I hate to say it about some of my old podcasts, like Podcast Beyond, where it's like there actually was a tether between the people on that show. And now it's totally detached from its history. So it's like just a name. It's a shell. And I think that that's what G4 was in some way. You could bring out the shambling corpse of Adam Sessler. No one really cares about Adam Sessler anymore. I'm not trying to be an asshole. Adam Sessler has alienated himself and alienated a lot of people that could be his fans. And he might have the goodwill of the people that make decisions at these companies, but those people are dumb. They've lost a lot of money on this. G4 is probably hemorrhaging money at this point. And so I just look at it like that. If you think about it, if you build a foundation of respect, then I guess I could imagine Last Stand existing without me. Could it exist in 50 years as some sort of legacy media company with that, where it's like no one even knows who I am? It's like I hope so, because I hope we build something that's more relatable or not relatable than just this ephemera, this vapid sort of coming and going. G4 was a very cynical ploy to try to take advantage of people's nostalgia and try to ram politics and agenda down people's throats. Yeah. I don't know if you saw him, and I actually have him on the show soon, Maddie, on Sacred Symbols Plus, but Peter Peschke, who's like a freelance journalist. I think he writes for like the Federalist and National Review and all of the rest. He wrote a story that just came out today. I haven't read the whole thing yet, where he's like kind of behind the scenes with G4, talking about how fucked up that particular Frosk video was for them. That video was edited before it was put up. That he claims that the clapping seal thing and like a lot of that stuff was put in, that there was actually awkward silence, like pin drop silence on the set when that happened. So there's so much to go into about how this thing broke down. But the number one thing, and I'm talking a lot, I'm sorry, is that
no, please,
is that you have to respect your audience.
Yes, I was going to get into that. Yep.
I know it sounds craven in some way, like, of course, the customer is always right, and just like your dollar's as green as anyone else's. But it's kind of true. Like, you really just need to remove yourself. And that's like the lowest possible barrier to overcome, is like, can you just treat your customers with a semblance of humanity and respect? That's the lowest barrier. If you can't overcome that, then you have no business on the market. And I don't feel like these people even understand that, which is why they're all washing out.
Yeah.
For better or for worse. I mean, that is the way it is. In a place where, dude, the competition is fierce. The competition is way more fierce in our space than in theirs. These people come from traditional backgrounds with mastheads behind them. We have to actually just make our bones and do it.
Yeah.
It's like
people like that.
So when you see some of these guys getting fired or laid off, and then they go and they start a Patreon and it doesn't do very well or whatever, I'm not celebrating that, but it's like that. I told you, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on the point of these personalities, like at CNN, for example, having a platform. Is like, what are you doing with it? That's one thing I've recognized in video game media as we progress to various other outlets, is they have the benefit of, it's never going to be easy, but they have the benefit of carving out a personality and having that automatic draw by, for example, being hosted on IGN. When you are a main host there, you just get a lot of eyes on you.
Right.
And the amount of people who have done the IGN exodus, of course, you being one of them, where it's like you built your name there, you built your portfolio, you have a respectable body of work, you've shown your talent, and you go, all right, I'm going to go do my own thing now. And like, you and the guys at Kind of Funny kind of started that, and everyone followed suit. And we're not seeing that as often now because I feel like people are barely cracking in. And once they crack in, you talked about things like disrespect. It's very common to just hate on gamers. And I'm not trying to toot our own horn here, but again, it's kind of what you said about just showing the respect and the cadence that you should to someone listening to your product. It's hard enough to get someone to click on your stuff when everyone's posting, everyone's trying to make their money on this. And I think people are just ultimately getting into it for the wrong things. It stems back to things I talk about in my video game reviews where I go, we have a disgusting amount of people in the media who complain about reviewing games. Like they are and I get it, like the crunch process sucks. I review games all the time. But we have people who are complaining that you have to sit down and play a game for like 20 hours across a week.
Yeah, it's
like that's a big part of the job. And
right.
You should be playing games. You should be embracing that and embracing that blessing. I'm not saying this is applicable to those who are part of G4, but it's certainly applicable to the larger games media. It's 100% applicable because they're confessing it constantly. And it's extremely infuriating to watch, especially, with us, we're with the largest gaming Patreon right now. And, it's still one of those things where we're trying to grow. And when you see people leeching like that, I find it frustrating, not because I'm overly competitive, but it's because like you're doing nothing with the opportunity you've been blessed with.
I totally agree, dude. I worked at IGN for years, as you know, and I reviewed hundreds of games, and it's fucking hard. Mm-hmm. And it's a lifestyle choice that you choose. That's why, even though I didn't always see eye to eye with him, I thought Dan Stapleton, who's still at IGN, was a really good reviews editor because he was just obsessed with it. It was that was all he cared about. He didn't give a fuck about the news product, the preview product, the video well, he cares about video reviews, but the outside video product, who's making money. It was all about reviews. Every review went through him. He read every review, and it gave IGN an authoritative voice. And I hated working with him in that regard because it was hard, not because it was bad. It was because I wasn't used to someone editing me so much. And that was my own problem. And so there are still people kind of, I think, trying to do things the right way, but they're getting overshadowed by what I look at as a political zealotry that mirrors a religious furor in every single way, right on down to its idols and its slogans and its predictable outcomes and causes and its blind eye paid to so many different things. We're going to talk about Fanbyte in a minute. Yeah. The biggest problem with Fanbyte is that Tencent owns it. Any other conversation has to start there. But when all of the shit fell apart, everyone was wondering, well, why isn't Tencent paying me anymore? And it's like, well, maybe you should ask yourself, why are you working for Tencent?
Yeah.
And maybe that's like a bigger question to ask. And so I find the asymmetry there as far as what people are willing to cover as well and not cover. And I even look at some of these people at IGN that are supposed to be doing this new revolutionary news product there. And I'm like, what are you writing? I write Sacred Symbols every week. It is a detailed show, just like Defining Duke. I know who's writing the news, who's breaking the news. You aren't. Nowhere are you involved in the conversation, at least on PlayStation, at least in console space. And so I feel like it's to what you said earlier, when you have this, and what I said about CNN, when you have the masthead, it's only going to work for so long. IGN and GameSpot, I think, are like perpetual products. Although, it's as you said earlier with GameSpot, they were purchased, and the purchase price for apparently all those products was $50 million or maybe even less than that. I'll tell you that when I was a freelancer at the time, when Fox bought IGN in 2005, it was $650 million. And so 17 years ago, $650 million. Now you can see the decline in value of these websites is precipitous. And I'll tell you that when Fox sold IGN 7 years later and we went private again, they lost potentially $400 million or more. Wow. So even at that point, they were hemorrhaging. We were described as a piece of dirt under News Corp's shoe. Like they didn't even know we existed. It was like a write-off to them.
Wow.
And so I just feel like people that bet on themselves, like you and I think we benefited a great deal from not haranguing an audience that's just captive to a certain website, a certain channel, whatever, and then taking advantage of that. That's what that whole Frosk thing was. No one knows who you are. No one cares who you are. You have to earn the respect of people. And as much as I don't like Adam Sessler and some of those other people, they were there for them. So you need to kind of follow their lead. Maybe they were, but I don't know. I just don't. G4 is the greatest of mysteries. And we could talk about the websites too, but I know a lot of it has to do, and I'm sure you looked in your research, like I think a lot of it has to do with the Comcast CEO's son. I don't know if you saw any of this stuff and how he is.
I actually didn't come across that. No,
it's something to do with Comcast owns the name, and some C-suite executive's son works there as like a lower level executive and basically took this on as a pet project. That's how I understand it. So if that is true, and I think that is true, then it goes to show you just the problems of nepotism as well. But
yes.
So it just, again, whenever you're sitting at work and your boss is telling you that you're wrong, you might be, but you might not be. And can you imagine, Maddie? And I wonder how you feel about this. Do you think anyone working at G4 really thought it was going to work? Because I did see some people making commentary saying, like, I hope people saw this for what it was that worked there. Like, make your money, build a portfolio, get the fuck out of there.
Yeah.
It's like, was anyone actually thinking? They can see their numbers, right? I mean,
yeah, 100%. Their numbers. You look, I just started a YouTube channel last year with Retro Rebound, and it already exploded past anything G4 was doing. Based off the amount people were being paid there, which I don't know the number, but certainly they were getting good money to get these celebrities to show up and whatnot. They were not generating the revenue where their biggest product was being placed to justify all of that investment. It's, again, the writing was simply on the wall with all of this. And I actually want to dovetail a bit into Fanbyte, because I feel like, again, it speaks to the broader issue here. You talked about nepotism, and I think this is a perfect example of it. So Fanbyte, entire editorial staff was laid off, including the editor-in-chief, head of media, features editor, everyone's gone. The site's been reduced to just guides for, interestingly, the headline games being ones that Tencent has a stake in. So these are ones like Destiny 2, where they have a leaked mobile game partnership with Bungie on. Final Fantasy 14, where back in 2018, Square Enix entered a partnership with Tencent.
Oh yeah, they distribute it in China, right, or do something like that. Yeah,
yeah. So it's interesting that those are the games being featured there. I put that one together. I was like, okay, I see what's going on here. And a lot of the staff has been let go. One thing I noticed was some of the staff saw the writing on the wall again, right? They saw, okay, we're probably going to get let go. And if you read the tweets, you'd be able to tell, because there were people who wrote at Tencent, who posted editorials and whatnot, saying, hey, if you wouldn't mind just clicking around the website for a little bit. I had sent it to you because I saw it. I was like,
incredible.
Yeah. They said, if you please click around this site a little bit, it'll really help. Just 5 minutes. You don't even have to read anything. I'm like, look, I get we got to hold on to our jobs. And certainly I've been blessed enough to be my own boss for my whole life. Outside of this, of course, but you're a great boss, Colin.
Thanks.
But
I try to be very laissez-faire.
Yeah, right. I don't say it out of disrespect, but I almost wouldn't call you a boss, because it's not like you overrule ever. Like, you're just like, all right, go ahead.
Just kind of around.
Yeah. And so I just, I understand, like, you just to hold on to the job, the finances of the situation. I completely get it. But when you strip your pride away and pretty much say, without directly saying, no one's reading my work, please click on it. Otherwise, I will lose my job. It's like me going, Mr. Matty Plays, Retro Rebound, they're dying. Please go click on these videos. Otherwise, I'm going to have to get another job. And I don't want to say, oh, tough shit, but it's a situation where you're pretty much admitting your work has no value to the consumer right now. And only you want to hold on to it because it matters to you and your group. And where the nepotism steps in, to me, is when you start to see, I go through the quote tweets, I go through the replies, everyone who's working with each other, done, no problem, got it. Hey, friends, please do this for my friend. I'm just like, what the fuck is this? We're at the point where we're trying so hard to keep a dying breed around. And I'm not calling for their death, but we're trying so hard to keep them around that we are farming clicks with no substance to them to keep sites around for Tencent, no less, that we've talked about in a separate DDU. That was the point where I lost my mind when I saw it, because that's no humility across the board from anyone. And I'm just curious how you felt about it, because I know I sent it to you. We briefly chatted about it, but of course, the situation with Tencent speaks for itself Fanbyte speaks for itself with Tencent being the owners of it. But there was a lot of shock and awe, like, oh man, why did we get laid off? It's Tencent, dude.
Well, I think a lot of people there's a few things, Maddie. It's funny. The first thing is there was this idea, well, Tencent made all this money. Why can't, and they did, they made enormous amounts of money, profit. And the question is, did you make any of the profit? Like just because they made it doesn't, you don't just sustain losses. And this is what I said on Sacred Symbols. I'm like, do you want window facing jobs like in Japanese firms where they just won't fire anyone, so they just put you in the fucking 15th floor and tell you to shuffle papers around? Like, who do you? It's to your point. Like, who do you think you are? Mm-hmm. And just because it would be like being at Apple, the most profitable business in American history, but you work on some shitty product that no one really cares about. And you're like, well, why work at Apple? Why am I not getting any of the money? It's like, well, your particular project, or you're like, what you're doing or contributing isn't actually the reason we make any money. Why would you be rewarded for it? Yeah. And I just find that doubly rich coming from a company like Fanbyte that was owned or is owned by Tencent, where it's like the forbidden fruit, basically. From that perspective, I don't really feel bad for them. I feel bad for them as individuals, but this should have been torched from the very beginning, as far as I'm concerned. And I thought when you showed me, Maddie, and other people were circulating the traffic thing where they were being like, click around, do all this stuff. I thought that was low key one of the craziest things I've probably ever seen.
I agree completely.
In like the professional world, to the point where you wonder, what do you have the dirt on someone? Like, how do you, if I did that at IGN, I would have been fired. There is nothing more important at a website than its data. And there's nothing more important. Of course, it's content and all that. But when you're behind the scenes and you're working on everything and you're seeing it, we used to have a huge TV screen in the news pit at IGN with all of the data real time. Very important. What's trending? What needs to go into the top header? What should just be removed? What are we not writing about? Mm-hmm. If you tweak with that and they don't, and it has some sort of cascading effect where you don't have a read on the data, that's catastrophic.
Yes.
And when I saw that happen, I was like, well, you guys are done, first of all. But if I were the editor in chief at the time, I'd be like, you guys are fired. And there's just absolutely no way that if there's no audience for it, then we need to know. It's like you have an apple orchard and the only people that come to it are your family, and they're doing it so that you make some money, but it's really not a market. It's people helping you and guiding you along, but not really letting you sink or swim. And so you're exactly right when you say that these people never establish themselves. It's not working. It's failing. You're not owed a market. I'm not saying these people didn't work really hard. I worked really hard. You worked really hard. And ironically, what's saving them is guides, which is where I began to begin with. And it's just, to me, the sense of irony in these people now going to and begging for money from an audience that they do nothing but talk shit to and about is weird to me. See, I never feel bad about having a subscription model because I don't talk down to people. And by a rule, I mean, if you want to come at me or say something, that's why we have a lot of beef with all of these people. But you made a good point as I exit this I wanted to say, Maddie, you made a great point about the almost rotary system that these people have going, where they buttress their own numbers and make it seem like there's some sort of cause celeb behind everything that's going on with them. And I noticed it when they would say shit to me. I'm blocked by a lot of them, but someone would talk shit and then it would have like 15 likes, and you'd go through the likes and it would just be all the people that worked at Fanbyte. And I'm like, okay, so this is like a mirage. And it turned out to be just that. And I wouldn't be surprised if they don't even survive in this current form. I mean, strategy guides is tough. That's a tough way to make a living. And no one in their right mind wants to write them. So, and I say that with all due respect. I'm clearly crazy. People have listened to me for years, but you have to have an obsessive personality like I do to have any success in that field. It's not a good way to live. Strategy guides broke me. So I hope that if they're doing it, they do it sustainably, but it's a hard way to make money. And I don't know. A lot of those people can go fuck themselves as far as I'm concerned. It's personal with me in some of them. It's not from the high 40,000 foot view. I'm happy you lost your job. It's not that. It's like, it couldn't happen to the nicer people kind of situation, like that kind of feeling. Like, I feel a lot worse for the people that are losing their jobs at a lot of other places. Let's say that.
Yeah. I think your opinion on that is totally fair. Just given how it got personal with a lot of people. Obviously I can't pretend I'm in the same boat. A lot of these people will try to communicate with me, and I'm relatively picky with that type of stuff, because I've seen the backstabbery firsthand. It's not pretty. So it's just one of those things where it's very much a sink or swim type mentality out there. And again, I think because that has been the culture that's set in, you talked about sports, like a lot of the teams are defined not just by tradition, but culture, like a winning culture. And We have very much here at Last Stand, not to toot our own horn while everyone's going down, but I think one of the reasons why we succeed is we have a very much a mentality of like a high tide raises all boats. So like, hey, if Retro Rebound's doing well and Lognet's doing well and Snark Tank is doing well, great. We want everyone to do those things because they grow us as individuals and bring people to Last Stand. And I think you can see the example, at least on the YouTube numbers of Defining Duke. It's not like it's exploded by any means, but I've seen steadily since the show started. We went through a dip when Carrick had left us, and then it started to gradually pick back up where we're getting better 10 plus K listener numbers over on YouTube, floating near 15, 16. And that's a huge improvement back to compared to when the show first started. So there is that buildup effect that occurs. And I think it's where the success lies is individually building yourself up, not these groups of egos and personalities that, you know, again, you talked about like the what corpse of Adam Sessler, like,
like the
pulling him out of the
shambling corpse
closet and throwing him out there and be like, remember this guy? Like, it's one of those things where sticking with the sports example again, like when you'll have like a Aaron Boone, manager of the Yankees, is like, man, Boone was around for that walk-off home run. I forgot what playoff game it was.
2003. So Game 7 ALCS.
Yeah, it's like, remember him? And he's a good manager, by the way, I think. But my point being is like, you know, remember this guy? Like, yeah, he's one of us. And now he's managing the team. It's a full circle cultural mentality. And I just feel like that kind of perverts where games media is at. And what we're seeing here is, as we get into our next outlets and purchases, is I think the companies, the owners, are starting to see a lot of the fact that this is a dying breed. I hate to say it. UK media outlet Future, they made layoffs to their staff despite a 48% revenue growth. I think that symbolizes to me personally, like, okay, things are, you know, looking good here, but this is not sustainable. This is not going to happen every quarter for us. And perhaps what I think is the bigger talking point is fandom. So for those who don't know fandom, they're you'll see them when you look up any type of video game movie thing. Like, they run all the Wikia pages. You'll see like fandom.wikia/whatever game you're looking up. So think of them like a video game wiki. And they had purchased GameSpot, Metacritic. I'm surprised this one's still around, by the way. TV Guide.
Yeah, man. Shout out.
Yeah. GameFAQs, Giant Bomb, Cord Cutter News, and Comic Vine for a reported $50 million. And like you said, possibly less. Now, in the write-up by Fandom, they said that there's a collective, by the way, which this isn't much when you look at all they have here. 48 or 46 million monthly active users. It's good, but when you combine them together, like, I'd say GameSpot should be getting that individually. I wouldn't be surprised if they're like the one pulling the most.
They once
there.
Did, for sure. I mean, much more than that.
They've fallen off.
Yeah.
Now, where it gets interesting, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, is I've sort of theorized here that, again, this is a situation where Red Ventures, the former owners, are just kind of seeing like, okay, we're not going to make money off of this. Get rid of them and collect what we can now, because they acquired TV Guide, Metacritic, GameSpot, and Giant Bomb in 2020 as part of a $500 million deal to buy the CNET Media Group from Paramount Global. Now, when Red Ventures had completed this acquisition, my thought process was, that's a lot of money that they're spending on this. What are the headlines? Like, what are the companies? Of course, we've talked with Hogue Law a lot. Like, what they mentioned first is what's most important internally to them. And the first two things they mentioned were ZDNet and GameSpot. And obviously now we just saw GameSpot was sold in a collective deal for $50 million, which is 90% less than where they first started. But they also mentioned, again, the same ones that we're talking about here with Fandom. TV Guide, Metacritic, Chowhound was a new one. And Fandom's been on a bit of a warpath with collecting these media groups. In 2018, they acquired Screen Junkies, who does the Honest Trailers videos. Mm-hmm. And in 2021, they acquired Fanatical, which is an online video game retailer. So they've been on a bit of a spending spree here. But I'm curious, Colin, if you see what I see in this one. Do you see, in this case, Red Ventures, the former owners, getting rid of this stuff and identifying like, we're not going to make money off of this, especially when also that UK media outlet Future made money and said, we're still going to get rid of you, because it just seems like this isn't sustainable for them. Yeah.
I mean, well, the first thing is that for the Future stuff, we have to be careful, because I saw that where, and I don't know if they went any further into it, but an increase in revenue doesn't mean it's still profitable. It might not be. It's still, even increasing its revenue 48% might not have made Future profitable or sufficiently profitable. And that's all that really matters. Like, no one cares how much money you make. It's about how much money you profit after all of your costs. And so that's a relevant thing. And I wanted to point that out. But the as far as the CBS stuff is concerned, I think there's a few things at play here. First of all, CNET and CBS owns real estate. I think that was part of why this deal was so lucrative. Like, they own that skyscraper at like Market and 6th or something in San Francisco. It's where GameSpot was. I used to go there all the time. And so that alone is probably worth an enormous amount of money. And so the canny operator in me says, like, they were probably always going to mince this thing up in a bunch of different ways and try to make their money back and take the things that really matter, like real estate, which is always going to be worth something, even though we're about to see a real estate plunge, I think, and interest rates are going up. But I think that they probably looked at the staff and headcount at these places and said, like, we can either do the work to lay off a bunch of these things and basically gut them, because we're going to enter, we're already in a recession. I don't care what the government says. Like, we are in one, just categorically and definitionally. We are in a recession. We are going to continue to be in one, and it's going to get worse. So they have to make cuts, and they might just say, like, let's just get rid of this shit, make a little bit of profit, cash on hand. We can probably write off some of the losses that we're going to take. And, we can actually probably prolong the write-off on those losses over many, many years, which is beneficial to them as well. So I would just imagine that, like you're talking about Red Ventures and these other venture capital firms, they know exactly what they're doing. It might not work out, but this seems intentional, because I think that cost of buying all of CBS Interactive stuff came along with a lot of real estate and just hard assets, and they wanted that first and foremost. That was when I saw that price too, because I was like, that's insanity. That was my assumption as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just, to me, when you see the Comcast, Red Ventures, all of them cleaning the slate, if you will, of games journalism. I mean, you define IGN, which I'd say is the biggest outlet. Maybe it wasn't at the time, but I would say it was the fastest growing, probably, as like dirt underneath the boot of Fox. I mean, that's insane to think about, right? And now here we are, where I'd say video game content consumption is probably at its highest it's ever been. Maybe it's not necessarily for typical media, but it's definitely, with TikTok and YouTube Shorts and YouTube videos and podcasts. Like, I think the consumption of that content is at its highest. So that's why, again, it fascinates me that they're dying off. And one thing I've recognized, because GameSpot's in this conversation here, is like, YouTubers make a very specific type of thumbnail. I know this because I am one. And what I've recognized with GameSpot is, despite a lot of their former staff and a lot of just games media in general shit-talking YouTubers, their style, their approach, because the reality is we could fire up the camera and talk whenever we want. And that's how we got started, where they had to go to school, get a degree, apply for a job, crack in. I think there's a bit of envy, a bit of animosity there between these two.
Definitely.
But what's interesting to see
Not a bit, by the way, Maddie.
Yeah, I'm trying to be generous here. But what I'm seeing generally over time now is they're starting to absorb our practices, the kind of ominous titling, the face in the thumbnails. GameSpot posted a thumbnail when the rumors had popped up now about a Horizon Zero Dawn remake or remaster for PS5. And, one of the staff members face palming, one of those things where I'm thinking, well, this looks like a typical piece of YouTube content. And that's intentional, right? Again, you talk about the people in the back room, the data rooms they have there. They see the click-through rates. That's the type of stuff you run with. I mean, I work a lot with Jimmy Champagne on Retro Rebound, and we're a very data-driven group there. Like, we look at what people are clicking on, how long they're watching for, and that stuff does guide the decisions of, like, okay, we're going to stick with this thumbnail with the pinwheel background, with the box art, and me just looking at it, because that is what's driving a new audience to our channel. We're having a 75% not subscribed to 25% subscribed viewer ratio. That means we're bringing in thousands upon thousands of new eyes. We're going to keep this format. We're going to keep pushing it this way because it's bringing new eyes. So when they look at these types of statistics, especially a bigger firm than me and someone else, they're 100% noticing the spikes in views that you get when you make these types of thumbnails. Because honestly, the title doesn't even sell your video enough. It's your thumbnail. And when I see them start to copy YouTube practices, to me, it indicates that as much as they spew venom, they know we're doing it right. They know that this is the way, not to quote Mandalorian, but this is how you're supposed to do it. And this is how you generate traffic in a fair way that doesn't rip off the audience. But it goes back to that key missing piece I talked about, which is the personality, the person to attach to. You don't know who you're going to get when you click on a GameSpot video. You don't know who you're going to get when you click on an IGN video. Back then, though, with like Podcast Beyond, when it was popular, you knew like Greg, you, so on and so forth. Like you knew who was going to be there, Goldfarb. It's like, okay, I'm going to click on this. I know who I'm going to get. As that's become more and more of the thing on the internet, that's why another reason these outlets are starting to fade is you don't know whose content you're consuming.
Right. No, yeah,
and typically it's a no name, not to be offensive, but it's someone you don't know. And it makes it easy to trash on their opinion because there's no respect built between the audience and that outlet. Not to keep rambling here, but you know, the reality is like I've definitely had takes that I would consider scorching hot for sure. Like when I came out with my Deathloop review, like I know I was in the minority there and I did catch a lot of flack for it. But I imagine if I was IGN, GameSpot, I posted that and no one had a fucking clue who I was, I would have been torn alive. Like I'm sure the like to dislike ratio would have been horrible. The comments would have been horrible, but because people knew who I was, my taste, how I approach games coverage, and I'd say the respect my name can carry, that there was a difference in the reception of that. So again, it just goes back to what I'm seeing here, which is that these big companies are getting rid of these games media outlets. These games media outlets are desperately trying to adapt, whether it be by farming clicks on their own with their own kind or by copying what we do. And neither will work because one will not drive data in the right way. The other can't drive data in the right way because even though you're doing the right thing format-wise, you don't have a person to attach it to. Because I think of like Barstool. They have this guy, Caleb Presley, and Barstool's kind of like another one where I'm like, not really as great as it used to be. But they have this guy who does, you should watch him. You'd get a kick out of it. It's like Sunday interviews. And he sits there and just like, he'll interview Aaron Rodgers. He'll interview like Najee Harris. And he'll just ask them the most ridiculous questions. And it's hilarious. But he's like the number one content producer there. And it's like, the reason people are going is not because he's Barstool. It's because it's Caleb Presley. And like, this guy's hilarious. And he's getting people who are famous in these kind of uncomfortable, but not like too raunchy positions. And it's just an enjoyable watch. So I've rambled, but I'm just curious to some of your thoughts on all I had to share there.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about Barstool earlier too, in a more glowing way, because though I don't think that's the end result of where we're going in terms of the media evolution, I feel like Barstool. I was at Northeastern in Boston when Barstool was a paper. Like I remember it, and I remember it being like this weird thing. It was just there. I had no idea where it came from, because you get the Boston Phoenix and you can get the Boston Metro. Those were like free newspapers. They would hand them to you when you were going on the subway or getting out. Very common thing happening in cities. They used to do it in San Francisco too. And then Barstool showed up and it was just this thing. And it became a website and it became all these things later on. But it was like 10 or 15 years of building that. And I think, so they are part of that. They're part of that evolutionary genetic. Yeah, it was just like a newspaper. Like a small, shitty,
I thought they
newsletter.
were always a website and video output. Cool.
No. Back in the day, people that were, the only reason I know that is because I was there. I just happened to be there. Otherwise, I wouldn't know that. They don't ever talk about that, but it is how they began. And people can probably go find a lot of that also. I'm sure people still have all those old newspapers and stuff, but it's interesting because they're, again, not the end result of where we're going. The evolutionary track continues inexorably into something new. But what I do realize about what's happening to them is the same thing that's happening to IGN. They're just about 10 years behind. So what's happening to them more recently is that it's to what you say. You raise up these people and they don't need you anymore. And unfortunately, that's the reality of media for these big companies. Back in, 50, 60, maybe not 50, but 70, 80 years ago, people, as you probably know, were studio actors. Like when they were an actor, they worked in studio films. I was a Paramount actor. I worked, MGM. And then eventually everyone's like, we don't need to do this. This is insanity. You have no ownership over us. We can just do whatever we want. We're not that hard up. And so the actors came together and started to protect themselves. And I think you're seeing the same kind of trends happen where we are the doers. We are the reason people tune in. I hate to say that because there's so much work that goes on behind the scenes too, but let's not get caught up in that as well. No one, listen, I'm a huge Jets fan, right? Everyone knows that. The Jets have a $200 million cap, right? And all these players. And the cost that goes into supporting that $200 million cap is much lower because there's no way, as much as I think the equipment guy is important, that he's as important as Zach Wilson. And so we have to do what we need to do to make Zach Wilson happy. And then we have to understand that by elevating Zach Wilson, he might not need us one day. That's kind of the risk reward. And then you kind of hope you can hold him and you hope things work out, but you never really know. And people have kind of entered this world of so-called free agency, I think, where we have the tools necessary. The competition is fierce. There are platforms all over the place. Dude, we're not on TikTok at all. I've never been on TikTok for 1 second in my entire life.
Same.
We're missing out that entire, I'm sure that's a high growth, but I don't want to work on that platform. I have no interest in that platform based on where it comes from. And clearly it's spyware and all the rest. So I look at what we can do and where we can focus and be really, really good at it and not bite off more than we can chew. And also, I think an important part is to continuously earn it. That's what I think you were saying earlier, or at least alluding to when you're talking about your Deathloop review and maybe some of the more contentious opinions you have. I am known for my contentious opinions, but over these many years, people stick with me because they understand the consistency, they understand the quality, and that I really want to earn it. I always say I leave it out on the field. When I think the only time in my career I ever let it get to me was kind of funny when I would really let the outside world affect my work in some way where you can kind of read it on me. But it's not my job to bring that into the world, into your world rather, as the audience. It's not my job to bring my baggage, my political opinions, and beat you over the head with them and do all these kinds of things. It's really my job to come forth with gaming information, and when it crosses over with economics, when it crosses over with politics, all those things, but be responsible with that and earn it every show so that people continue to come back. So we're not resting on our laurels, because only IGN and GameSpot and the old legacy sites can have any chance of doing that. And that really is due to systemic SEO. That is due to legacy links. That is due to having huge back catalogs of reviews and strategy guides and wiki content. That's not a natural advantage. That's just from being there first. So really, in reality, Maddie, the market wouldn't support any of these websites, all things being equal. But all things aren't equal because of all the systemic Web 1.0 kind of advantages that you would have. So it's incredibly complex out there. But isn't it ironic that they're still failing? Like, that's the thing that's so interesting to me. I just don't think people care about these websites anymore. I used to deeply care about IGN. I will always care about IGN as someone who worked there, and I owe my career to it. But I have no affiliation or attachment to its content anymore. I don't even know what it means. It's what I say about Star Wars. I know people are tired of hearing about it, but it's like, I don't even know what Star Wars means. What does that mean? And so we have to, I think, individually kind of, again, to this free agency point, individually carve out our space and improve our worth, and then collaborate and communicate and be with each other or not with each other in ways that make the most sense. We don't have to worry about these old ways of doing things.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, we've talked a lot about sports here, but I think it's relevant because it's not just a games media thing. It's all over the place. I love baseball, clearly by the sweatshirt. And I used to pay for MLB Network every year. I loved coming home from when I was in college, coming home from class while I was eating lunch. I'd throw on the MLB Network and see what was happening that day. Intentional Talk was one of my favorite shows to watch at dinner. Which is not me. Many people know I'm not a TV guy. I'm not a movie guy. It's just not something that I made time for. But that, NHL Network, et cetera, like that's where I'd get all my sports coverage. But over the last couple of years, John Boy Media has popped up. And what they specialized in at first, which kind of their main growing point, right? It always starts with this new, unique idea, was they do breakdowns of plays. They have this guy, I forgot, I think Jimmy O'Brien is his name. He's John Boy. And he just is a really good lip reader at the end of the day. And he will go through plays in baseball that are abnormal, abstract, and break them all down and highlight the funny things that happen. And people have grown to love the sport more. And what's interesting is years before, baseball was called a dying sport because it was slowing down. They're putting the man on second in extra innings, trying to speed it up. In the sense, the pitch clock, the balk rules, like the list goes on. Like baseball was changing so much, it was losing its purity and going in the wrong direction. But I would argue that John Boy Media like single-handedly kept people's interest, and they weren't even a part of the MLB Network. Now, like some of the guys there, they'll sign deals with like the Yes Network too, because the guys there are mainly Yankee fans. They run a show called Talkin' Yanks. But the point being is they remind me a lot of what we're kind of doing here, where they've carved their own area next to where the big networks lie, and have siphoned all of those viewers off of said big networks, where people are going, this is more analytical. And as a Mets fan, like I don't listen to Talkin' Yanks, but I'll listen to Shea Station, which has like Jerry Blevins, a former relief pitcher for the Mets, on there. It has Jolly Olive, who's like a longtime Mets fan and analyst. And I'm like, okay, like this is awesome. Like I found my content here, just like people come to us. They see like, okay, Last Stand Media, like I may not be an Xbox fan, but I love PlayStation. Let's check out Sacred Symbols or vice versa. And like we have that offering there. And again, it's happening all over the place where we're experiencing it, we're living it. And John Boy Media is just one of those examples. I feel that maybe people who listen who don't watch sports don't know what I'm talking about. And the best part is, even if they don't like sports, you can watch John Boy Media and enjoy the hilarity of the sport of baseball. And that's, again, a huge draw for them. On top of their podcast content, their randomosity, and again, it goes back to they're a tighter group. They've grown over time, but they're a tighter group, and you know the faces, you know the personalities, you know what to expect, and that draws people. So it's this just vicious cycle of kind of repeating the same argument in different ways for me throughout this entire show. But again, it's happening all around us.
Yeah, I will say too that, I mean, we're not ready to talk about it yet, but I think soon we'll be able to, in the coming months, we're going to really try to leverage that on our own side as far as this fusion you're talking about trying to leverage the different personalities we have in new ways and in fun ways, because that is the engaging aspect of Last Stand. It's not about, Last Stand doesn't have a history. It's not like, the Mets, Queens, and Long Island, Shea Stadium. And, it's like, no, we're just like some dudes working out of a house. So like, it's got to be about something else. And it's got to be about the camaraderie, about the content and all these different things. Mm-hmm. Here's the beauty of it though, and it's something that we have to get to the heart of, I think, before we go, which is the individualism on display has heightened the quality, as we know, gives you all sorts of shit. Like I've been talking about that guy Summoning Salt. I'm sure you know of him, or have you heard of this guy?
No.
Oh my God, dude, you'd love him. You got to check him out. Summoning Salt. He's a YouTuber. He does like documentaries on speed runs. And like, and they're so, dude, it was to your point when you were saying how you don't even have to care. I don't give a fuck about speedruns. I don't even care about half these games that he's talking about, Mario Kart and all this. Dude, it is riveting. The production level, the quality of the research, the music, and all of the it's incredible. And to me, I look at this and I'm like, this is awesome. And you know what's even better about this is that this guy is making so much more money doing it on himself or with a small production company than he would ever make at one of these outlets. They would never appreciate him for what he brought to the table. And we see this all over the place. In some way, these magazines and newspapers and these websites have to sustain these large bodies of works and these people. And so there's a lot of financial ramifications. And with that comes shitty advertising and sly ways to get your money and pop-ups and all the things that have come up in the past, right? And we don't have to worry about that really, because we don't have the overhead of 625 Townsend or whatever the fuck we were at IGN in San Francisco. I mean, that building is millions and millions of dollars a year. No doubt, right? We don't have to worry about employing a bunch of people and paying them and their FICA and all this shit and putting into their 401ks and all that. That's good shit. And I'm glad that there are big corporations that are able to take care of people like that. But at the bottom rungs of content creation are the people that are able to do it themselves with micro communities, and the expectations have totally changed. If I was at IGN and I had and Sacred Symbols has, between audio and video, probably a hardcore audience of 60 or 70,000 people. That would be a complete failure at IGN. That would be unacceptable. Podcast Beyond is way bigger than that when we were doing it. But the point is that they never were able to monetize it. They made nothing on those podcasts, which is the craziest part.
That's bad.
And like Podcast Beyond, when Greg and I were doing it, would be amongst the biggest podcasts in the world, I think, right now, based on the numbers it was doing then. I mean, that's incredible to think about.
And
not
they didn't
just in the
monetize
gaming.
it at all?
No, they didn't. IGN was weird. I'll leave it up to Per Schneider and all these other guys to tell the story one day and why they went about it this way. But there were certain decisions made that I felt like they were reluctant to ever work with third parties that could help. And I always look at the IGN video player and the obsession internally over the IGN video player as this one thing where what IGN should have done is exactly what Game Trailer should have done, and they didn't, and that's why they fell, which was like, no one gives a fuck about your proprietary video player. No matter how good you make it, no matter what you do, no matter how much more money you make on your ads endemically on your site, you should just embed YouTube and become big there. And they were like, no, well, being big on YouTube does nothing for us. We need to be big on our website. And I'm like, but you don't understand. No one cares about IGN.com. You have to go to where the people are. That's why podcasting and the ubiquity of it is so great, because we can be everywhere. That's why video, even if we're not on YouTube one day, where we're not going anywhere, obviously, but if we wanted to go to Rumble or Twitch or one of these other places, we can do that. And so the real beauty of the kind of the decay, because it's not it's not prognosis negative. It's prognosis terminal for these places. It's over.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of time. The good news that comes out of that is just the micro communities, the seemingly infinite starscape of them that don't need $1 million a year to succeed. They might need $50,000 a year. They might be able to do it on less than that. They might be able to do it on a little bit more, and when you change the economics of it, then something like Retro Rebound or something like Sacred Symbols or whatever can succeed. Wherein if they looked at the numbers that we did on YouTube and they looked at the numbers here and there, they'd be like, what are you doing? This is a complete waste of your time. But it's only a waste of my time because you required so much more value out of me.
Yeah.
And if I could just concentrate on what I was good at.
You build something much bigger around that core piece.
Right. That's exactly right. And that's why I said it on the show, and I said it recently. I don't know if you saw on Discord. It's like I went to Per Schneider after their recent PlayStation editor left to try to buy Podcast Beyond again, which I've tried to do in the past, because I was like, I want that brand. Like, I want it because it really means more to me than you. Right. Yeah. And I understand. I didn't think he was going to sell it. They're not going to sell it. It's very nice to even entertain me. That's their biggest brand or whatever. But that's where my mind was at, isn't that more like my brand than, yeah. And just because we happened to start it under your umbrella means it's your brand. I get that that's the legality of it. I'm not contesting that. I'm just saying, isn't that nice? Isn't that freeing that like we don't need to, it just sounds so anti-capitalistic, but we don't need to create $500,000 per person worth of value. We can just create $100,000 worth of value each or whatever. You know what I mean? Isn't that nice?
Yeah, I totally get where you're at, man. It's something that we're seeing more and more. And it's perhaps why they're downsizing so quickly now. And they're starting these layoffs because they have to start from the ground up if they're going to end up trying to keep them around. And much like you talked about with the economics of the situation, build around it. There's a reason why when I started Retro Rebound, Locke's the editor, Jimmy's the consultant, and that's it. That's it. Like, I'm not going to get a bunch of other staff on board for, let's double the video production. Let's edit more videos. Let's hire another editor. Let's get another thumbnail artist in here. It complicates the process before you even know what you have. And I think that's the problem here is you want to start small and gradually build up. I think there's an overemphasis in all of these games media outlets and really even new incoming YouTubers on the quality of like your presentation. And I always say like the bare minimum you got to do, and we talked about this with G4, is like your personality, man. Like, you can't fake it because people will find out one way or another. You have to be authentic, transparent, nice, and build from there. My Retro Rebound setup, we're sitting right here in it. It sucks. It's terrible, but it gets the job done. And
it does get the job done.
Yeah, and the people will watch because not that the setup's nice. Would it be great if I had a perfectly lit setup here? Yes, certainly it bugs the hell out of me, and I can't wait to move out of this studio space to get the proper lighting setup. But people watch because of the nostalgia factor, because of the personality, perhaps. I don't want to be too boastful there, but there's so many other factors that go into it, and people like small business. Like, that's the thing. Like, Last Stand, small business.
Yes.
People like their local small businesses, and you get that small business feel with these tighter channels, with these tighter products that aren't spanning across dozens and dozens of teams. I think we lose the plot sometimes. I don't mean to get into this whole YouTube content bag, but we lose the plot sometimes where I don't like to overproduce my content. That's just my style. Like, I look at someone like Scott the Woz, who I think is a great content creator. It makes sense now because he's apparently going to put some of his content on G4 TV. Like, okay, you're going to go to television. But when he produced it in a certain way, I was thinking to myself, well, it's YouTube. Like, we don't need to overdo this. And again, it's his right and his desire, and it's what separates him from the pack to borderline produce TV quality videos. But for me, I'm just like, people just want to sit, relax. Most people aren't even watching the video. They're eating, they're listening while they're doing something else. So like, let's not overkill. Let's not overdo it here. Like, sometimes simple is good. At least that's how I typically look at it.
Oh, I do too. I mean, people know that was kind of my exit out of Kind of Funny. I mean, that was really the major reason for it was I wanted it to be what we're doing right now. It's like, why are we making this so complicated? Why do we want a studio space? Why do we need a video wall? Why do we want to spend all this money on this thing? And I'm seeing that happening now with them again. From the outside, it's like, this puts you under a certain amount of financial duress, I think, when you extend yourself too much. And now you have a studio, now you have all these employees and all this, and you have to justify, and you have to continue to justify that. That's very difficult. That's why And that's why, like, I know that there must be something up with that, because you wouldn't risk your relationship with your consumer unless you really had to. In the way I was reading about it, it seemed like that's the way it kind of went down with them, and that's sad to see. Yeah. And they'll figure that out or whatever, what's best for them. But it goes back to it reinforces this point inside of me, this feeling I've always had inside of me, which is, it's what I've tried to tell you and Chris as well, is specifically you and Chris, is that, like, we should be using the money to make the content as good as possible and to make ourselves comfortable in our lives so that we can make the content as good as possible. That's why I keep telling you, buy a house, right? I keep telling Chris, like, buy a house. Like when Chris went back to California, I was like, no. Are you working on it?
Yeah.
Excellent. I mean, it's like, don't worry about, we don't need real estate for our business. I'm not going to make everyone come somewhere. It's time for us to take care of ourselves too, so that the content is the best it can be. It's what I keep telling Dustin. It's like, I want us to get work. And I've said this to you before. I want us to work as little as possible. If that requires us to work 50 hours a week, sometimes that's what we're going to do. But ideally, I want us to work as little as possible to do the content as best as we can, not just waste time and twiddle away and shuffle papers like people used to do at IGN and pretend that you're working and doing all this stuff, because your work's done. And then everyone kind of remains happy. See, being broken out of this commercial corporatist sort of mantra that, and I was in the corporate world. I know what it was like. This is different, and I want to keep it this way. I keep saying to people on Sacred too, you see all these companies, it's like, oh, we'll throw you a pizza party and everything. I'm like, you know what? My people want money. And so, like, that's the best way to keep them happy, is like money and control, right? Agency. Stay where you want, be where you want. Chris, even if you want to go back to California and for some reason be there again, like, take control of it and use it to your advantage as well. Because basically all of the extra assets that you're accumulating as an individual for your brand would just have been acquired by the corporation, siphoning that from you to begin with. So you might as well use it for yourself, and pay your mortgage and do all sorts of stuff. So that's a lot of these people, unfortunately, that are washing out as the game of musical chairs becomes more and more severe. They were never able to realize the potential of it. And I was really sad, although I'm happy for them, to see a few people, because they've hung around, but to see a few people that I thought could have jumped that didn't. And those are the people like Damon Hatfield.
Loyalists.
I mean, very loyal to IGN, and I appreciate that. I was too. I couldn't imagine leaving IGN. It made me want to throw up. Literally physically throw up thinking about it. Like, wow, am I really going to do this? This is all I ever wanted, kind of shit. And but you realize the control, it's just everything that you could have possibly wanted. It's why I really encourage people to try to work for themselves if they can. It's, of course, flippant to say it's not possible. Not everyone's able to do that or has the means or mode to do that, but it's been good. And I love our little decentralized thing that we got going on, our little republic, as it were, of content. And I
absolutely agree. It's really well put. So I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to add on here in conclusion to our conversation about the state of games media, like any lingering thoughts, or did you just get them all out?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much said it all. I know that some of the audience, I read your guys' feedback. Some people are tired of hearing me, especially talk about this because we bring it up a lot on the show. But I continue to say, Maddie, that I don't make the news. I simply respond to it. So as these things become pertinent in our ecosystem, whether it's the layoffs at these websites or the mergers and acquisitions in gaming and the continued recession and the pinch that's going to put on gaming, I think it's going to have bad effects on some publishers and developers. I think you're going to see layoffs in the next 6 months to a year that are significant. So we continue to report on the news, good and bad. I know that it sometimes gets rote and tired, but it's very relevant. And I know your audience feels the same way. It's very relevant to cover the way games are covered in addition to simply covering them. In traditional media, as you know, that's up to the media reporter or the ombudsman or whatever you would have at a publication. But we have to kind of just do it all. And I enjoy it. It's what you were saying earlier, too, like you have your reviews and all these things, but there's the mechanics of everything behind what we do too. Yeah. So I'm glad to have a venue, and I appreciate you inviting me to your show to have a venue to talk about it further, because I personally enjoy talking about it, though I know it is tired.
I do too. I know it's a touchy subject for a lot of people, specifically in the industry, but I think that's kind of the thing that Last Stand and we as personalities before all of Last Stand kind of specialized in, is tackling the tough topics that no one wants to get into. No one talked about Tencent owning Fanbyte ever. Support our friends, support our friends. No one talked about the harsh reality behind that site. And even when they got what was, I don't want to say coming to them, but they got exactly what was obviously going to come to them. Um, everyone pretended to be surprised. And it's like, well, it's because you're ignoring facts. And the audience is, I don't know how to word this other than the audience isn't as stupid as I think people believe they are when they're creating the content. But my only real concluding thought I wanted to add on to what you were talking about with working as little as possible is I think much of the same thing. Like, I think about how I'm assembling a small team for the game I'm working on. And it kind of is a byproduct of what you mentioned with like creating that free time, because with that free time, I've explored more projects and I'm able to offer more value to the things I work within because I have more knowledge on something that others wouldn't, which in this case is game development. But I very much operate the same way of like, I don't really enforce strict deadlines. We have a timetable where we want something done by, but some weeks will be power weeks. It's like just everything's firing on all cylinders. Everyone's handing in assets and content. It's like, oh man, we're really firing away. Then life happens, things slow down. But I'm just like, hey, take the day off. It's cool. Like, just go handle it, whatever you got to handle. And they come back stronger. And I think what we've learned collectively, individually, and brought it together is there is a semblance of working with humanity that lifts up these groups and that crunch culture, if you will. I think anything worthwhile will eventually need some degree of crunch. That's just always been my personal philosophy, if you will, when you're working in the creative space, because you may just crunch without even noticing it. Like, totally. You just may be like really into your script for Sacred Symbols, and you'll work into the wee hours of the night. But I digress. The point being is, this is a situation where when you keep things airy, open, welcoming, that you welcome that type of audience, you welcome those types of people to work with you, like we have here. And I think you create something that's sustainable and something that's lasting, and people want to be around it. And that's what we have, both individually and as a group. And I think it's why it works and why you're seeing it not work for other people. So that would be my general concluding thoughts on everything that's happening here.
Yeah, I think I share and mimic or echo, I should say, a lot of what you have to say. I think the one thing I think that I try to think about sometimes is just how remarkable it is that we as artists, I guess, and I use that term as loosely as possible, but I think that like in the arts lane, how lucky we are to do what we do as well. And it's, you had mentioned earlier, like people bitching about reviewing games and all that. I am so grateful, having worked blue collar jobs and having done things that I didn't want to do for a living and all of that when I was in college and high school, and being very lucky to find my way to IGN and all the rest. I'm grateful that I don't have to do the soul crushing thing other people will have to do every day. And the very least we can do is give them something to enjoy during that time. Because I know that the UPS driver cannot, circumvent his route and not go to work that day or whatever. It's so.
Yeah, it's something I talk about on the show a lot is who's listening to our show and where are they? And like someone sent us a tweet, Cog and I, saying like, oh, I was on the plane. And someone was like, oh, your shows help you brought up UPS driver. We get a ton of write-ins from those types of people. So you're, sorry to interrupt, but like you're totally on the money that it like that type of brevity, that type of relief helps a lot.
It just, I never saw, I guess what I'm saying in closing is just that I never saw that kind of gratefulness. When I see a lot of these tweets, gratefulness is not a word, gratitude. When I see tweets being like, I need my next job and I did this and this, and you have 500 followers. No offense. I mean, that's fine, but you had a masthead, you had an opportunity. It's what I was saying, kind of making fun of Ian Walker when he got laid off at Kotaku. It's like, dude, you were there for years. You have like 3,000 Twitter followers. How is that possible? It's no offense, but like, how were you at Kotaku when you were so uninteresting that you have no following? Like, you had a captive audience of many millions of people over many years, and it just didn't work out for you. And I don't see a bit of contrition or mirror looking from a lot of these people, which I think is pernicious and strange, because if I was in the game of musical chairs, which I'm not, I guess, and if I were on the way out or washing out, I would be a lot more grateful for what I had and be much more willing to do what was necessary to stay, as opposed to having this almost this sense of ownership over a role you never really earned. And I find, I don't know. It's sad to see people wash out, sure, but it's just, I find it weird that people are like really not understanding that it's not just systemic, it's them.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that that's true. It's like just as a closing example, when Drive Club failed, I mean, it sold well, but it took a year for them to fix the game post-launch. It was supposed to be a launch game. It was delayed 6 months, and then it was totally botched, right? They got shut down. There was like a consequence. Now, we can say, well, I feel bad for those people, and I do. And there were some good people that worked on that game, and I'm sure there were. But is there any doubt that there must have been complete incompetence working on that game too? I mean, are we going to pretend that everyone that works hard and works and does the right thing and does a good job?
Well, that goes back to the culture thing I talked about with the kind of back padding that occurs throughout the whole industry.
That's exactly right. And so I'm not saying I want to see more consequences. It's up to these different moneyed entities to have consequences or not. I'm just saying that you see examples sometimes, and it's easy to say, like, I guess what I'm saying is when I see things like Fanbyte was the best thing on the internet and it was the best place I ever worked, and it's like, it wasn't the best thing on the internet, and it might have been the best place you worked, but no one cared about it. And I've actually been tweet searching almost every day for Fanbyte just to see if any legacy exists of it other than the people that work there talking about it. And the answer is there isn't. And so just as an anecdotal kind of observation, I wasn't doing it to be mean spirited. I'm simply looking to see, like, is there a reflection on, because I remember when 1UP went away, we owned it at IGN. And that was like a travesty to people. That was like a thing that went on. Like, people were remarking about that for years.
Yeah.
And that was how you knew something really meaningful was gone to someone. I didn't give a fuck about 1UP, but to some people, that was like, you knew, and you just didn't see that here. And so I think that there's a lot of mirror looking that needs to happen too. And these people just don't want to do it.
Completely agree. There's a lot that we said here, but it's time for the audience to chime in. We appreciate you listening to us the whole way through, Colin. I appreciate you joining me on this. Your insight, as always, has been fantastic. And I think it was much needed for this conversation as you worked on this side for quite some time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very glad to do the show. Congratulations on Duke's continued success.
Thank you.
Really proud of it and happy with it, and glad people are really enjoying it.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's hoping we get those secret symbols numbers. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. We're looking forward to seeing your thoughts down below, whether they be in the comments, on the Patreon comments. Let us know what you thought of our conversation here. And until next time, we will catch you with episode 90 of Defining Duke Ultimate. Peace out.
Defining Duke, an Xbox podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Colin's Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from the United States of America. The show is conceived by Matthew Mr. Matty Plays Schroeder and me, Colin Moriarty, and is written and produced by Matthew Schroeder. Matty's co-host is Barry Lord Cognito Eversley. Defining Duke's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including Defining Duke, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level on Patreon, and we're thankful for your kindness and generosity.